You're not hard to love. You're following instructions. Those instructions weren't written by you, not the adult you. They were written by someone much younger, in a very specific situation, who had no way of knowing you'd still be running them decades later. Right now, in your closest relationship, in the way you hold yourself back at work, in the moment you go quiet when you most need to speak, there's a rule operating. You didn't choose it. You don't remember agreeing to it. It was just there, and you've been living by it ever since. And the strangest part, the rule is working exactly as designed. It never trips an alarm. It doesn't feel like a rule. It feels like you. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what that rule is, where it came from, and, for the first time, you'll be able to decide whether you still want to keep it. Here's something about children that adults tend to forget. They're scientists. A 3-year-old doesn't think, I wonder if crying will get attention. They just cry, and they watch what happens. They do it again, they watch again, they push the edge, they test the limit. Completely unconsciously, they're running experiments and collecting data on how the world responds to them. When the experiment produces the same result enough times, the child stops experimenting, they conclude. And that conclusion, psychologists call it a schema, doesn't stay as a thought, it becomes a filter. A lens through which every new experience gets interpreted. Jeffrey Young, who built one of the most influential frameworks in modern psychotherapy around exactly this idea, spent decades mapping how these early conclusions quietly organize the entire adult personality. Not as memories, as operating instructions. Maybe the schema was, when I need something, I have to be loud or I'll be ignored. Or, asking for help leads to rejection. Or, the safest version of me is the one that stays small and waits. Or, I am lovable only when I'm useful. These weren't wrong conclusions. They were accurate readings of a very specific environment. One house, one set of people, one period of years. The child looked at the evidence and drew the most logical conclusion available to them. The problem isn't that they were mistaken. The problem is that the conclusion got filed as truth. Not as, this was true with those people in that place when I was 7. Just truth. About the world, about people. About what you are and what you're allowed to want. And the child grew up and took the file with them. And there's something else happening at exactly the moment you think you're making a free choice. Something about where that file lives in the brain and why you can't reach it the way you think you can, but we'll get to that. Here's what happens next. The rule goes underground. When you're young, you can almost feel it running. You know you're being careful around a certain parent. You know you go quiet when someone raises their voice in a particular way. The logic is visible. If I do this, that happens. The rule is a strategy you can almost see. But the brain is efficient. Efficient systems automate what they use repeatedly. After years, after thousands of small repetitions of the same response in slightly different situations, the brain stops asking permission. It just runs the rule. So by the time you're an adult, the rule executes before a single conscious thought arrives. Someone criticizes you at work. Before you've even processed what they said, you're already in the posture the child knew: fawn, fight, or disappear. You didn't decide that, the rule decided. And it was finished before your awareness even showed up. This is why you can spend years in therapy. Understand exactly where a pattern came from, trace every thread back to its origin, and still do the same thing on Tuesday. Here's the part that even researchers find difficult to explain. Understanding and behavior change are processed by completely different systems. What psychologists call implicit memory, the system that stores how to ride a bike, how to flinch before you hear a sound, that system doesn't update through conversation. It doesn't care what you've figured out. It runs on repetition and activation, not insight. By the time your understanding enters the room, the rule has already acted. And here's what most people get completely backwards. More understanding of the rule doesn't weaken it. The goal isn't to understand it better. The goal is to find the original sentence the child wrote and bring it into contact with the world you actually live in now. Which raises the question, how? The cost of not answering that isn't abstract. It shows up in specific places. Relationships that keep ending the same way. Opportunities you pull back from, right at the moment they start to feel real. a recurring feeling of being almost known by people but never quite seen. You find the rule by following the pattern backward. Not the emotion, the pattern underneath it. Rules don't produce feelings, they produce outcomes. The same outcome in different situations with different people across years. If you keep ending up in the same place, pulling away exactly when something gets close, going silent when you most need to speak, saying yes when everything in you is screaming no, that's not personality. That's a rule running on a schedule you didn't set. You start with the recurring outcome, and you trace it back. When did I first end up here? How old was I? Who was there? What did I need from them? And what did I learn that day about whether I was going to get it? Most people find it faster than they expect, because they were doing the exact same thing back then, just with different furniture. The rule in close relationships often sounds like, if I let someone fully in, I will get hurt, so I keep one foot out. Or, I'm only safe when the other person needs me more than I need them. Or, love is something I have to earn continuously or it disappears. Those don't sound like rules, they sound like knowledge, like just how things are. And that's exactly what makes them so hard to question. They've been running long enough that they feel like reality. Not a decision made by a frightened child in a very specific moment. But that's what they are, a decision. Made under pressure, with incomplete information, by someone who was doing the only thing they knew how to do. Here's what I want you to sit with. The rule you're running right now, the one shaping how you love, how you hold yourself back, how you decide what you're allowed to want when it's safe to be seen. It was written by a child, a smart child, a resourceful child, who was reading the room as accurately as they could with what they had. That child was not wrong. The rule kept them safe, or as safe as it could. There was real intelligence in it. But that child was navigating a world you no longer live in. They had information about one house, one set of relationships, one version of what was possible. And no one ever sent the all clear. No one told them the situation had changed. So the rule kept running, quietly, efficiently, in every room you've walked into since. You are not that child anymore. You have more choices, more resources, more capacity to survive outcomes that would have felt catastrophic at 7. And you get to go back to that rule and ask the question the child never could. Is this still true? Is this still the world I'm in? Are these still the people I'm dealing with? Or am I applying instructions that were written for a room I left 30 years ago? Most people never ask that. Not because they don't want to change, but because the rule doesn't feel like a rule. It feels like knowing. It feels like the thing that keeps them safe. And maybe it did once. But you're not in that house anymore. You walked out years ago. The rule just forgot to tell you. Tell me, what rule do you think you've been running? I read everyone,